Well, hello and welcome to the nextSource briefing series. I am Kyle Tortai, Marketing Manager at nextSource. nextSource is a leading provider of contingent workforce solutions. Our mission at nextSource is to advance the way companies and institutions connect with talent, yielding results today while preparing our clients for the future workforce needs. To this end, we are fortunate to have an opportunity to draw on the expertise of Chris Bruhl, the founding and managing director of Leadership Networks. His consultancy has played an essential role in the growth strategies of many businesses, nonprofits, academic institutions, and government agencies throughout the U.S. Chris's credentials are extensive and impressive. Over the past 3 decades, he has established a reputation as a highly innovative executive leader for nationally recognized private regional development corporations. His highlights include representing the United States at an Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation, or the APEC Summit, serving as presiding officer for a tri-state transportation policy conference convened by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, serving as managing director of the Institute for Local Arts Agency Management, which is a national program conducted in association with Yale University, and as a co-chair of the New York, Connecticut Workforce Investment Regional Economic Development Initiative, or WIRED, which is funded by the US DOL. His experience also includes faculty positions at public and private universities. And Chris has served on a variety of boards, commissions, and advisory groups, including the American Chamber of Commerce Executives, National Center for Safety in the Arts, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Transportation, Infrastructure, and Logistics Council, and much more. He is a frequent advisor, writer, and speaker on the subjects of economic issues and trends, the relationship between education and economic competitiveness, infrastructure investment, and workforce development. He will explore all of those topics with us today, so please welcome Chris.
Thank you, Kyle. Well, let's get started with something that we all experienced. Last year in 2020, life hit the ketchup bottle hard. And so our question today really to talk about is what now? But just a quick reminder, Kyle already introduced, but let's look at the nextSource basics, just 4 key ideas. Reliance, all enterprises, large and small, public and private, rely on workers to produce their products and services. And nextSource, of course, is about talent. We help customers find, manage, and keep talent. We live in a world of constant change, and since an enterprise's talent needs continuously change, nextSource constantly updates its understanding of the internal and external factors that are affecting its customers. And of course, market conditions have an enormous impact on every firm. And today's presentation is really our take on current market conditions and enterprise talent needs as we all emerge from one of the greatest challenges of our lifetimes. So let's take a look at that ketchup bottle last year. Well, there were 3 really pivotal events. Of course, the pandemic and the resulting economic crisis. Let's stay with that just for a moment. It is now one of the most horrific experiences that the world has experienced really since World War II. More than 4 million people have died, tens of millions thrown back into poverty around the world. In the United States, as a highly developed nation, we ourselves were hideously impacted. Over 600,000 people have died, but the basis for recovery was, in other words, government investment, and prompt action in terms of vaccine development. Steps were taken in the midst of the pandemic to prepare for a more rapid turnaround. In the midst of last summer, as the pandemic was reaching its peak, of course, there was the killing of George Floyd and social protests that followed. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but it's worth noting that the pivotal element in that tragic death was the realization that it was not an isolated event, and the social protests rapidly spread from issues of policing to broader issues of inequality. That's why, in our judgment, pivotal really is the right term there. And of course, the national election, which was affected by the pandemic, the economic crisis, the social protests, and we saw a change of party in the White House, change of party in the Senate, reduced majority in the House, but continue. Now we have unified Democratic control, although barely in balance for the first time in many years. While those things were happening on the surface, like the waves of an ocean pounding against us, really important transformative trends continued, and many were accelerated. And we should kind of frame our thinking today by remembering and thinking about identifying these trends. Artificial intelligence, of course, whether it's robotics or bots or software in general, AI continued to accelerate change across virtually all industries. Demographics. The United States continued to get older as boomers, now the second largest generation, millennials being the largest, but with better health, Americans were older. We are more diverse. We are dramatically more diverse under the age of 30 than we are over the age of 60. So overall demographics are continuing to change. So we are a more racially diverse nation, and we are unfortunately having slower birth rates, and so therefore we are also an aging nation. Gender gaps persist. We always think about gender wage gaps, but they also have to do with promotion, with opportunity for training and development once in the workplace. A wide variety of gender gaps have been in place for years. Some are narrowing, some are not. Leaving cities for suburbs, it was discussed widely during the pandemic, but that has been underway for a decade. And what we're really talking about is people leaving cities for other smaller cities and suburbs in the same metro area. It's not that Americans have suddenly decided to move from Maine to Montana or Florida to California. It's that they've chosen to leave New York City for Northern Jersey, Westchester County, or Fairfield County, Connecticut, or they're moving to the outskirts of Houston or to Evanston outside of Chicago. So we're seeing the trend to stay in the region, but to leave the city. Climate change and severe weather, whether it's horrific forest fires, other severe weather like more frequent hurricanes and flooding. These are trends that have been underway because of climate change, and they are accelerating. Our infrastructure, which we have been underinvesting, if we look to the 50-year average prior to 1980, and then the average since 1980, we have been in decline in our infrastructure investment across the country at local, state, and of course, mostly national levels. And therefore, we are seeing the deterioration of roads and bridges, the slow achievement of universal broadband, and other impacts. And of course, infrastructure are also impacted seriously by severe weather and people leaving cities for suburbs that need to commute back to their jobs on a full or part-time basis. Immigration has been growing. It's been changing. During the Trump administration, immigration certainly slowed, but the underlying trend of having fewer immigrants from Mexico, which had been our primary source for 20 years, fewer immigrants from Mexico, more from Central America, and a significant increase, continuing increase of immigrants from India, China, Asia in general, means that the composition, the skills level, as well as the languages spoken by immigrants are changing now and have been for a number of years and continue to accelerate. And finally, social policy, really fundamental changes that have been decades in the making. Gay marriage, minimum wage being addressed as a municipal or state issue, Me Too accountability cutting across all industries and government. These are examples of trends that have been underway long before the pandemic and really influence our workplaces. Let's just look at a few really interesting numbers for a moment. And these are from really late June, so in other words, early summer. 9.3 million jobs are open in America now. There are more openings than there are unemployed people who are looking for work. The labor force is about 161 million, which is 3 million less than it was pre-pandemic. That means that there's real demand for talent. No surprise to anybody hearing this morning or today. And the challenge is supply. So effective sourcing, where do we find the talent we need? Whether we find it in-house or we seek it out and find it externally, the ability to source is now a competitive advantage. And I can't stress that enough. At the same time, 3 million American women have left the labor force during the pandemic. Most cited reasons in a number of surveys of large size samples of women who have left the workforce. They talk about pay equity. They talk about the not being valued at work, and that they have limited caregiving options for their children or for their elderly parents. So that certainly asks the question, can pay equity, revalued work, and caregiving options become a return to work strategy targeted at women? Given the shortage of talent, it would seem wise to try that. 24% of American workers, around 40% of millennials, have, in a number of surveys, have talked about planning to look for new jobs as soon as the pandemic eases. And they're citing a whole wide range of issues: compensation, live-work balance challenges, professional opportunities. But the sum of it all is every enterprise is going to have workforce churn. It's not going to be unique to any one employer. It also means that every dreaming and departing worker needs to be seen as a candidate for recruitment if they're not yours, or retention if they are. And by meeting worker goals, we'll reduce the need for recruitment because we have increased our ability to retain. Direct sourcing, which is a relationship-based, data-driven strategy, will become much more important in the years ahead as we look to the issues of dealing with churn. We've also turned now a really profound corner into a time of talent leverage. Quoting Neil Irwin in the New York Times from early June, workers are gaining leverage over employers right before our eyes. It's a profound shift. Employers are responding with greater flexibility, increasing pay, being willing to train, accepting somewhat different kinds of qualifications, and showing greater flexibility in where and how people work. But this erosion of power on the employer side really began pre-pandemic. And given demographic trends, which means boomers leaving the workforce and a lower birth rate and slower immigration, although continuing, but slower, this erosion of employer power could really last for years. So we're in for a time of adjustment. And if enterprise leaders adjust how they think, they will, as we have in the past, thrive. But change is not easy. So let's talk about why the change, if we could. Today's senior managers really built their careers during a time of employer leverage, but now they're dealing with talent scarcity. The first recourse, the first kind of habit is simply to work harder and to expect others to work harder, to get tougher on procurement, on us suppliers, and to get tougher on their internal talent recruiters. But then we'll adapt. Hiring managers and procurement leaders will adapt by adjusting their expectations and by increasing their collaboration internally and externally. Remember that contingent share of the workforce has grown steadily for really more than 2 decades, and worker leverage declined during that period of time. Scarcity created talent leverage means that contingent workforce management, CWM, may need to accelerate its evolution because the leverage factor has shifted from the employer to the worker. So increased talent acquisition and compensation costs really are going to create incentives to retain and train in order to increase total enterprise productivity. But change is hard. Executives tend to see employee selection and management as their job, and pipeline management as someone else's commodity service. Helping customers really understand their new problem and their new position, really that they're competing decision makers. They're not just cherry pickers. That's the responsibility of trusted advisors within and outside of the enterprise. And really, it's the first step to resetting expectations about what the talent ecosystem can deliver. Neglecting to educate the customer, the internal customer, as well as from an outside perspective of your customer, about the need for a scarcity toolkit really is a disservice to the decision-making customer, and will really put advisor and supplier relationships at risk, as traditional methods really produce poor results in the new competitive environment. What talent wants now? Well, what talent wants matters, since effective recruitment and retention are really mission critical. Understanding what talent wants is essential to success. So American workers, according to a very authoritative and large survey that's been conducted on a quarterly basis for 30 years by Prudential's Pulse of the American Worker initiative, tells us that American workers want job stability, overwhelmingly so, 68%. I suppose not a surprise after a pandemic year like they have experienced. They want good work and life balance. Salary and pay comes in third. Insignificant, particularly when people are thinking about having decided they want to move. Where do they want to go to? Comprehensive benefits, again, health insurance apparently has never been more important. Comprehensive benefits really fit right into that. Then we have a sense of purpose, work skill alignment. Does my work require me to use the skills I have, or am I playing out of position? And then advancement opportunities. So it's really worth reminding ourselves that if the leverage has shifted to the worker, then the issues that the hiring entity, whether it's a traditional employment relationship or a contingent relationship, stability and balance and pay are at the top. And if we don't deliver those, talent will not necessarily consider us as their primary option. So let's look at 10 the realities. Some of them are larger than others, but worth noting as we think about where we're going to find our talent, where all enterprises find their talent now. It's a kind of a fun way to put it, but I think we've all felt the pressures. We've been told, wait. Now, everyone needs talent immediately. After a year or so of waiting to see which way the pandemic and the recession was going to go, right now we all need people. So fulfillment has become the highest challenge facing talent providers. The idea that we have a new set of relationships between, first, broadly, talent and employers, and about all those people involved in recruiting, retraining, training, developing talent, means that candid conversations about shared responsibilities are needed. Let's chat is the simple way to say that. Talent supply chains and leaders of enterprises do need to communicate now about the new reality. We need to focus on the priorities of the worker, not just the priorities of the employer, because they have the leverage. So we need to be able to demonstrate to workers that they can have job stability, as well as the other priorities that we just listed. But at the same time, if we're thinking about contingent workforce management, we need to preserve the full range of advantages that CWM provides to the customer. So it's a balancing act. It's different than it's been in recent years, but it is essential going forward. Taking the next, obvious, but let's make it clear. Retention is at the heart of this. It's the old joke of you have a hole in the bucket, you can have an endless amount of water, but if you have a hole in the bottom of the bucket is never full. Well, talent retained is an appreciating asset. It gets better over time. as well as a replacement expense avoided. Greater focus on retention seems obvious. Upcycling strategy needs to go hand in hand with retention, because underperformers who are retained may save some money for replacement, but they don't allow the productivity increases that we need. So talent upcycling as part of a CWM strategy, things like performance assessments that are developmental, helping people do a better job, skill building assignments, moving people along in kind of a opportunity to learn new things while they work. And of course, access to formal training, even for contingent workers, not just permanent employees. All of those investments in talent, upcycle them, in other words, improve them. And that strengthens our supplier networks and increases worker stickiness, less likely to leave because they feel they're improving their chances longer term. And it certainly promotes enterprise satisfaction when you upcycle the skills of a current person in your talent ecosystem. You already get a good fit because they've already been a good fit. You don't go through the same onboarding uncertainties that you do when you have a start from scratch relationship. DE&I goals. Talent scarcity can really help us there. We have to acknowledge the fact that there are a number of internal cultural barriers to give more than lip service to DE&I goals. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not easy work. The fact that we have a real shortage of talent, that means everyone who contributes is needed, will help accelerate the pace of cultural change within organizations. Bringing women back, we can't neglect the 3 million women who primarily for caregiving and health concerns have stayed away from the workforce. Focus on resources that enable women to participate can be a differentiator, more than just wages, but a differentiation that deals with the full range of concerns that the women who've left the workforce have. Direct sourcing from the enterprise's workforce ecosystem is really powerfully enhanced by talent upcycling. People who you may, individuals who you may know already in a certain perspective can do more from different parts of your ecosystem if they are enabled to improve their skills. From that point of view, it's really worth thinking about easy to fill positions as entry points. Any enterprise will have a combination of, oh my God, I'm never going to fill this job. I've got 6 people who can do it tomorrow. The 6 people who can do it tomorrow, those will tend to be, the lower wage, less demanding, but these may very well be trainable people who can move up kind of a career hierarchy, a skills ladder. So let's think about entry points when we're thinking about easy to fill. And then finally, even with, and we'll see more of this in a moment, the growth of hybrid workforce on a hybrid basis, people live somewhere and jobs are done somewhere. And the hybrid model saying, yes, remote, but it'll be out of the office, work from home, as opposed to true remote. And then in the office part-time, it does mean that geographically, residence and place of work will still be in the same broad area. So that means local development and training, not just in-house within the enterprise, really may be needed to help engage and work with, I should say, those entities that are specializing in workforce development and skills training. It enables enterprises to expand and diversify their talent pools in the same place where they are already doing their work. So those were big macro trends, but as we know, the devil is still in the details, and we need to take a look at some of the most important specifics that we're facing in terms of sourcing, management, and retention. So here's a few that nextSource is looking at now. Really defining and transitioning to hybrid work locations. It's easy to say work from home 2 days, go to the office 3, or reverse 3 and 2. Easy to say that, but it comes with many, many issues. A simple one, which we all got waivers during the most of the pandemic, but work from home compliance issues with OSHA, FLSA, Homeowners insurance. Are your employees allowed to conduct business in their home under their home policies? Zoning, etc. Those are now being addressed all across the country, and in different jurisdictions are being addressed in different ways. We have the issue of mandatory and voluntary COVID vaccination. Colleges and universities, publics and privates. Privates are to a very large degree moving quickly to require COVID vaccination of their returning students and faculty, while public universities are adopting policies that are more consistent with the state policies within which they are located. Whether employers in general will require, as many have required for years, flu shots, or the way school districts require measles shots. What will happen in terms of vaccination? That's a significant challenge for employers. Meaningful DE&I metrics. Metrics in this area go beyond heartfelt and inspirational statements about inclusion. They're talking about, change comes when you measure something, right? So what will we measure and how? That's a very important detail when we're talking about how we're going to bring women back into the workplace. Well, how is their performance going to be measured? We now have rapidly accelerating legalization or decriminalization of marijuana in states across the country. That means that those states in a variety of ways are decriminalizing past records, whether people were incarcerated or simply fined or suspended and sentenced, for example. Full decriminalization as a result of legalization means that their records are going to be wiped clean. Well, what does that mean for past applicants who failed a drug test because of marijuana use? Well, it means that they are now going to have to be requalified and rethought of as assets again, as opposed to too bad we can't take you. We're also going to need to look at we talked about this earlier in a little more detail, alternative ways of assessing and certification of skills when we're hiring, retaining, and promoting. If we're going to seek to retain, that means we can't send people away for 2 years to get a new associate's degree or 4 years to get. We need to be finding a way while they are working to assess their work and to certify the new skills they're gaining. That fits right in with the need for a modernized OJT, on-the-job training, including being paid for time spent on remote learning. Two others that I think are rapidly going to emerge as being significant as the pandemic eases. Ban the box policies, which means employers not being allowed to ask whether you have been incarcerated. State, county, municipal, and voluntary employer ban the box policies are growing across the country, but jurisdictions, particularly multi-state enterprises, face different policies and regulations on that. And then finally, of course, open and concealed carry in the workplace. In some states, employers can completely block any weapons being brought into the workplace. In other states, legislatures are working hard to assure that gun rights includes unlimited open and concealed carry. So this severe imbalance right now between talent supply and demand, will this too pass? Well, the answer is yes. It can't continue. It's too out of balance, but meaningful talent leverage is here to stay. It's here to stay for a period measured in years, not months. And the intersection of multiple really transformative trends are going to increase economic disparities and profoundly disrupt several industries. Something that we all need to be thinking about all the time is that compliance and employee equity, in other words, fairness among employees and compliance with local, state, and federal regulations are going to be much more difficult for multi-state enterprises as the country kind of subset divides into two broad groups. We're going to come back to that in a moment, but just keep that in mind. The more that we gather into subnational groupings, the more difficult it is for larger enterprises, multi-location, multi-state enterprises to comply. So to go back to the idea that yes, this too will pass, the talent supply imbalance will adjust. Schools and childcare facilities are opening over the next few months. schools first, childcare probably second. Vaccinations will continue to pick up, unfortunately driven by the Delta variant. Higher wages and stronger recruiting efforts will pull people back into the workforce. The enhanced unemployment benefits are ending, and child tax credits, the $300 per child per month that recently started, will certainly enable many women to return to the workforce. But leverage is here to stay. Reopening creates demand. The new infrastructure investments, as we're speaking today, $1 trillion infrastructure bill seems headed for passage in Washington. That means construction in every community in the United States. Consumer spending, pent up demand from the pandemic limitations. The consumer spending is growing. And climate impact mitigation. How do we deal with the fact that Miami may be underwater in 20 years or other, just as one example. So we're going to mitigate that. We're going to harden. We're going to move some functions, but that will really drive the need for spending and therefore talent demand. There will be continuous skills-based shortages. New ones will arise as new industries emerge and as new infrastructure investments create demand for new skills. And just as child tax credits are going to enable women to return to the workforce, they'll also allow some women to stay home. And while it's not, the credits are not, therefore, should not be seen as strictly a one-sided sword. This is a double-edged sword. But the winners of all of this, of course, are the children who are benefiting from having a family that has more resources to spend on their behalf. But there will be some women who can stay home. And we can easily see where that's going to hit the most. Industries with lowest wages, fewest benefits, and least predictable work schedules when you are on call, they will be hardest hit by stayaways. And particularly parents, largely women, who need to maintain a schedule that is consistent for their children will be less likely to accept employment in industries where they are forced by unpredictable work schedules to be constantly ad hocing their child care arrangements. And then finally, boomer retirements, which are surging now, they're not going to be offset by Gen Xers. There are 15% fewer Gen Xers than the overall boomer generation. And so there's too few Gen Xers, and then the Gen Zers are too new. So millennials will have to carry the burden. And what millennials want is very different from what boomers wanted, going back to the idea that they have the leverage now. We need to understand what it is that they want. Let's look at this idea that I offered a moment ago about economic disparities and industry disruption. The social political factors are really important here. And states and metros or large metro areas, Houston being a metro area, Los Angeles being a metro area, they are really, just grabbing some notes here, they're really sorting into two groups. I mean, you can see it in the daily news, the podcast that you listen to. The COVID vaccinations vary widely across the board. The need for access to affordable quality healthcare has become a very high priority for the public, and yet a number of states have declined to expand their Medicaid that's paid for by the federal government. And reproductive rights vary widely state by state. Minimum wage levels, they're moving to $15 in many states, and they're staying under $9 in many states. So minimum wage levels are becoming locational factors. LGBTQ rights, gun rights, response to climate change, voting rights, even mass incarceration. Some of the poor states have some of the highest rates of mass incarceration. Workforce subtraction, another way of spelling incarceration. People in jail are not in the workforce. The economy suffers when you don't have workers. Whether it's right or wrong for those people to be in jail, that's a decision being made within that state. The economic consequences are very clear. mass incarceration reduces the size of the workforce and hurts the economy. So those factors mean that those states, those places, those large metro areas that go to the extremes or towards either end of a pole, in those areas, these social political factors are really sorting themselves into two different kinds of places to live and to work. Technology is impacting us all, of course. Three I just want to touch on now. Of course, there's many more. AI, artificial intelligence. I don't know whether the self-driving car, whether we're going to just be picked up by our car every morning on a kind of a timeshare arrangement. That's probably a decade or two away. But driverless trucks, they're here now, and they will be rolled out in ever greater numbers. Universal U.S. broadband, we have a kind of universal internet access, but that's not the same thing as universal broadband. That will be coming over the next several years with legislation and budgeting that will actually occur this very week. And then there's the global green race, climate change and severe weather, as well as the expectation of economically upwardly mobile populations for clean air, clean water, is leading to a global green race. In the same way we have had an arms race, we've had a space race, we are having a green race, and technology is just at the heart of that. Certain industries are going to be completely redefined. The energy industry, clean energy, solar and wind power, they're already achieved scale to be cheaper than coal in most locations, for example. So the green race and the need to address climate change means that energy will be clean in the future. New technologies will be developed, and traditional sources of energy are going to be gradually phased out. And those enterprises that adjust to that and stay in the energy business will be fine because they'll have the capital to invest. Those who try to stay in the coal or oil business, they will have a harder time surviving. Trucking and logistics in general dramatically changed by driverless vehicles. It means you don't have a 10-hour day limitation on a truck driver anymore if it's a machine that's doing the driving, a computer. Telecom and energy, already mentioned those. Higher ed, when you have universal broadband and when you have labor supply shortages, which means the current workforce needs to be upgraded in its skills as opposed to merely the 18 to 22-year-olds or the 18 to 24-year-olds for those who take a little extra time to go through. Higher education will need to adjust to its new customer group and to new service delivery models. And then, of course, real estate. If you can do more things in more places, specialized real estate becomes vulnerable. Skyscrapers in downtowns, will they be readapted into housing? It's already happening. So real estate, commercial real estate will be one of the industries that's really affected. And then just a couple of more. Public health concerns really are emerging as factors in job selection. The permanent pandemic of the unvaccinated, if that kind of catchy phrase becomes a reality, then we need to expect a movement of certain people, largely people who have children, who want them not to grow up within a permanent pandemic, people who will move to find a safer place for their families. This is why the Middle East is in turmoil now, that we have millions of people who have left Syria after a drought in Syria that went on for 15 years, which coalesced the population into urban areas when they were an agricultural culture. And, extremism broke out, all kinds of things happened. Desire for democracy, all the foment of cities. Now suddenly millions of Syrians can't be in Syria anymore for reasons of safety. Nothing that severe will happen in the United States, but you can certainly expect that if the pandemic becomes permanent, a percentage of the workforce with options will vote with their feet. We're also seeing that public sector in some states are limiting and enforcing lack of reproductive health services for women. As women are recruited back into the workforce, as women's higher level of educational attainment than men, which has been a trend that's been underway now for 2 decades, that will lead to a kind of a reshuffling, a geographic reshuffling of women into communities where they feel their reproductive health services are available. Environmental contamination, we've already seen the term love canal from an earlier generation. People move away when they have the options from the environmental consequences of prior generations. And then the frequency of severe weather events. There's no point in building, your multi-million-dollar home on a hillside that's going to be burned down if you're in Oregon or California, or going to be swamped by floods. So the issues of longer term severe weather will really matter. And then work-life balance. Goods production and service delivery, they will probably move. They'll be migrating to high-cost, high-value locations and to ultra-low-cost locations. As in so many other areas, when you're in the middle of the road tends to get run over. So if you are kind of okay on cost and kind of okay in value, your community is going to plateau economically and ultimately decline. Workers are going to be looking for the locations that meet their priorities, and we listed seven of them earlier in this conversation. And locations that don't meet those requirements, stability, opportunity for advancement, the right kind of live-work balance, they will plateau and ultimately decline. Of course, the high-end niches and specialized enterprises, they'll always thrive. They'll have a hyper-local ecosystem, but that's not everywhere, and everywhere can't rely on that kind of strategy. So let's just close with a couple of ideas. Boy, 2020 was tumultuous. There's no other way to describe it. Going forward, it's our own values and beliefs that's going to guide our actions. It's not going to be governmental policy at the state or national level. We in an enterprise, we will run our businesses, we will run our enterprises based on our own values and our beliefs. But we need to understand our context so that we make good decisions. Because if we believe we're in one place, but we're actually in another, we're going to have a very hard time thriving because we'll be adopting the wrong solutions to the challenges we face. First and foremost, for our purpose today, is to focus in on the idea we have entered into a time of talent scarcity, and we need to adjust. Simply working harder at recruiting or simply offering more money, it will help. I don't want to minimize that. It will help, but it will not be a sufficient adjustment in this new operating environment. Many more issues need to be incorporated in our thinking. So sharing information and insights, the way we've tried to do in this presentation, will really help us all adjust more rapidly and make better choices. We can only work within the world we have. It doesn't help us to try to work within a world that we imagine. We can try to make that imagined world into a real world. But right now, we still need to cross the street, and we don't need to get run over by the fire truck because we haven't been paying attention to where we're going. Sharing information and insights really makes it possible for us to let our values and beliefs productively guide us. We can't, we can't go real far if we don't have real data. So thanks so much. We'd be honored to be able to continue this exchange in months ahead. And with that, I'd like to turn back to Kyle, who will if you can, let's close again, thanking you for your time and attention today.
Thanks, Chris. I think we kind of started to lose you there at the end, but I just wanted to thank you so much for that very informative and highly important presentation. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today. I hope you were able to glean as much from this as we were able to. And as a reminder, and as you can probably see on the slide there, if you would like to reach out to us, please email us at marketing@nextsource.com. And once again, thank you, Chris. I'm sure we'll see you again soon.